Okay, here I'm going to work with you on one of the examples that you gave. Okay, so this is the diagram of the example that you gave. Part A, they want you to find Peter, and part B, force exerted by the ground on the box. Let's talk about part A first. Now we want to find what is part A, right? Okay, we want to find what is part A. So the whole idea now is you want to find what is theta, right? In order for you to find theta, you need to know what are all of the forces acting on the box, right? So they give you a clue. They told you that the box is moving at an acceleration of 2 meters per second square, and then the mass is 7 kg. It means that the force here, right, the force that the box is moving, the box is moving along the ground, okay, is equals to F equals to ma. What is the mass? The mass is 7 kg times the acceleration. Acceleration is 2 meters per second square, and therefore it is equals to 14 Newton. Now, we know that the diagonal force is 30 Newton, and we also know that the force that is horizontal is 14 Newton. Okay, and there are no other forces acting on the box that goes sideways. There's only one, which is that comes from this 30 Newton that goes sideways. There are no other forces acting on the box, only comes from this 30 Newton. So how are we going to find? First, we create a triangle. Okay, so we have, imagine we take this line, this is 30 Newton, and then we take another line, this line, this is 14 Newton, and then we draw a line like that. Imagine, and we make this a right angle triangle. So this is theta, this is the angle that they want to find, right? So now we know that this is 14 Newton, we know that this is 30 Newton. Can we find theta? Of course we can. Right, so let's label first. This is the opposite, this is adjacent, and this is hypotenuse. So what we are going to have, we are going to have cosine, right? Cosine theta is equals to 14 adjacent over hypotenuse, which is 30 Newton. And therefore theta is equals to cosine inverse 14 over 30. That is going to be cosine inverse 14 divided by 30. Right, 62.18. 62.18 is about 62.2 degrees. Right, so just now earlier you asked me why is it 14. It is because 14 is this force here, this force here, right? That is why it's 14. And then this is the other force we have, which is 30 Newton, right? At this point you have to keep in mind of all the earlier things that I talked to you about, which is how this 30 Newton being a diagonal force, it can be broken up into two forces, which is the X force and the Y force, right? It can actually be broken up into two, right? Remember our first lesson? First lesson, the earlier part. Where is it? Right? Yeah, remember this earlier part, right? Whenever you have something that is diagonal, X component, Y component. So same goes here. You have a diagonal force, so you have an X component, which you know that the question told you is 14 Newton, right? And then the Y component we haven't find yet. Okay, but never mind, right? Because our concern for this question is the theta. So the theta is 62.2. Using whatever we know. Now let's take a look at part B. Part B, they want you to tell them what is the force exerted by the ground on the box. Let us redraw the question. Okay, let's redraw so we make it clearer. Now we know that this is 30 Newton, 30 Newton. Now we know that the angle is theta, right? We know that the force here is also 14 Newton, right? So this much we know. What else do we know about the box? They told us that the box is 7 kg, right? So the downward force of the box, which I didn't write earlier because it doesn't really concern us at that point in time, but now it does. Okay, downward force is weight equals to mg. The mass is 7 times 10 equals to 70 Newton. Right? So if you see what I see, you will be seeing, right, the force of 30 Newton, which is diagonal. So this 14 Newton is actually the x component of this 30 Newton. Theta we already knew, it is 62.2 degrees. We know that the weight is 70 Newton, right? What else is missing? Ask yourself, right? Remember, go back to the earliest part of this video, the one I told you that any diagonal force, you can break it up into two components. The first component is the x component. The component that we are going to find now is the y component. So how can we find the y component? Right? No problem. Right? The y component is the upward force coming out of this 30 Newton, right? Y component. So let's do this, right? Let's make a triangle first, right? If this is 30 Newton, this is 14 Newton, and then we have an upward force, something that we don't know. This one is 62.2 degrees. So how can we find Fy? How can we find Fy? Fy will always be equals to 30 sine 62.2 degrees. So what answer will you get for that? 26.54 Newton. 26.54 Newton. Okay, so now the upward force, this is the upward force. What is the downward force? Right? We know that the downward force is equals to 70 Newton. Right? So what is the net force? This is for question B, right? The force exerted by the ground on the box, right? So what is the total net force, right? Downward force is 70 Newton, but we have an upward force that is 30 Newton, right? Downward force 70, upward force is 26.54 Newton, not 30 Newton. So what are we going to do? We are going to take 70 Newton minus 26.54 Newton, the upward force. What we will get 43.46, which is, round up 3 significant figures, 43.5 Newton, and that is the final answer. Right? So if you look again at the working, it's actually quite simple. The whole idea is this: you have to find what is the x component and what is the y component. The moment you find what is the x component and the y component, all you need to do is you need to find the net force, right? Just now they asked you to find theta in the first question, so you know that the y component, that the x component, the theta, because it is going sideways, it is the x component. Remember when you did graphs, it's always this is the y axis and this is the x axis. It's the same thing, exactly the same thing. So this is the x component. So the component that goes up is what you call the y component. The moment you find out, then you just need to find the net force. If the downward force is 70 Newton, upward force-nya is 30, no, not 30, is 26.54 Newton, as what we have found, right? So what is the net force? Net force dia berapa? Minus. Right? It is that simple. Okay? WhatsApp me if you have any problem and I'll try to help you from here. All the best.